the Democratic Alliance made its stance clear that it will not support the implementation of the BELA Act, clauses 3 and 4 under no condition. The party has also put its stance clear that the NHI will not be supported by the party in its current form and shape. We now cross to SABC News senior reporter Samkele Maseko, who is in conversation with the DA leader and Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, after 100 days in office as part of government. Samkele, a very good afternoon to you. I was listening, of course, to those utterances and reflections made by John Steenhuisen earlier today, and he did mention 5 key priorities, of course, notwithstanding the 4 other issues that the DA says it will not compromise on. Over to you, Samkele.
Indeed, Unati, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, and also the Minister of Agriculture in the country, was reflecting on the first 100 days of the government of national unity, some of the key priority areas, 5 key priority areas of the Democratic Alliance in the government, and also some of the non-negotiables within this particular government of national unity, such as the BELA Act clause 3 and 4, which they don't want implemented due to the language policy, and also going to the implementation of the NHI in its current form and shape, and also the bailing out of state-owned institutions. Mr. John Steenhuisen, thank you very much for granting us this particular time. The first 100 days of the government of national unity have come and gone. What are some of the bottlenecks that you are finding in the Department of Agriculture?
Well, of course, it's a big culture change now with the splitting of the department. And there's still a lot of PTSD from the last time the department split. It left water affairs and forestry and then was put with land reform and rural development. So obviously we've been in a bit of a limbo because we now have to move offices, we've got to split up the assets and decide which programs are going to go to which of the ministries. So that's been one of the bigger bottlenecks. And obviously there's a lot of anxiety amongst the staff as well. Where am I going? You know, which side of the fence will I end up on? So I would say certainly in agriculture, that's been the main bottleneck there.
When you look at the department as a whole, as someone who's just come into government, how have you settled in as a team of the Democratic Alliance, from the various ministers and also the deputy ministers? How has the settling in been?
I think the settling in has been quick and relatively successful. If I look at some of the reforms that have been able to be implemented in just the first 100 days, incredible work being done by Dr. Leon Schreiber around tourist visas and scarce skill visas, digitizing home affairs, clearing the ID application backlog, dealing with visa applications. I think these have been successful. I look at the work that Dean McPherson and others have done around infrastructure and moving us towards utilizing infrastructure for public good and leveraging it as an asset. I look at the work being done by Ashur Sarupin as the Deputy Minister of Finance and guiding the MTBPS process and inputs there, and the work that Saviwe has been doing to focus on literacy. Each one of the ministries, there's been some key areas that things have gone incredibly well in. So looking back at the first 100 days, of course there have been a few missteps and not everything's gone smoothly, but I think by and large there's a lot more to be reflective on in a proud way than to look back and say, could have done things a bit differently.
Looking at these past 100 days, where have some of the areas that you would have loved to go well that have not done well? What are some of the grey areas at this point in time?
Well, I'd love to have a chief of staff for one. Yeah, obviously, staffing departments. I think the public spat around BELA has been unhelpful. I would rather have us resolve some of those issues behind closed doors. And I think that it's now a function of settling in and finding each other. There's still some outstanding issues, some differences on approaches to some of the international issues, but I've no doubt they will be ironed out. Moving now to formalize the technical task team that's going to be the clearinghouse for these issues that divide us.
Well, we'll get to the staffing issue in your office. It's been a topical issue. It's been a topical issue.
I'm taking applications, by the way.
I'm happy at SABC. On the issue of international affairs, what is your stance as a government of national unity, first coming from a Democratic Alliance perspective. I saw you were with the president when you went to FOCAC in China, Beijing. You are maybe also going to BRICS summit in Russia, and also the G20 is coming within the country. What is the main posture point of the government of national unity, and from a Democratic Alliance perspective, looking at the divergent views of these two big parties in the GNU?
So I think that the focus from a government perspective is certainly growth and jobs. That is the key focus of the medium-term development plan. How do we create more jobs? How do we grow the economy? And so we have to look pragmatically around the globe to see where are the opportunities for South Africa. As the Minister of Agriculture, I've got a duty to get my produce of our farmers and farm workers into as many international markets as possible. And that means going to places like China. They're a huge market and a very important ally for us in the trade environment. We are part of BRICS. I mean, the DA's last Congress accepted that we are part of BRICS, and we must now leverage that to make a difference. And I'm going to use our membership of those multilateral organizations to be able to make a case for South Africa's agricultural products there. Why do we have import tariffs of apples into India that's so high when we're a BRICS country? Why is China giving Australia favoured access from wine when we're a BRICS country? You should be getting South African wine there. And our wine's much better as well. So you've got to look at these things from a pragmatic perspective from government. But at the same time, I think you must be mindful not to get involved in situations that irritate a situation. So I don't think that... And I think you've seen a far more pragmatic approach from Minister Tao and others around the renegotiation of AGOA, approaching it not from a slavish ideological perspective, but actually we need AGOA because it helps our trade and industry in South Africa, and we need that agreement to work, but it must also work for us. And so in these approaches to international relations, I always use India as a very good example. India look at each situation and decide what is in the best interest of India in this particular situation, and then they make their interventions or their positions clear on their interest. And I think that South Africa needs to use our membership in both a South-South and a North-South axis to be able to leverage more opportunities for South Africa in produce, products and industry.
Did the visit to China change your perspective in any way, particularly on how the Chinese state operates in its relations to its other trading partners, particularly within the African continent and South Africa?
Yeah, they're tough negotiators and certainly very organized and well briefed. You get to meetings, it gets straight down to business, you get into the brass tacks. There's no sort of posturing in that. You know exactly what they want and what they expect from you. And I found that a very refreshing approach, and I'm quite a direct person as well. And so it worked well for me. But I can see why they're an international superpower. They take their economy and growth incredibly seriously. And it's what drives their foreign policy and their approach around the world. We signed some really good protocols there that I think are more beneficial for South Africa than for China, giving us access to their markets for dairy and processed dairy products. The foot and mouth protocol that we've signed, which will keep our industry, our beef industry, able to supply them even during foot and mouth outbreaks, will, etc. And the other work that was done around investment in infrastructure, very important as well. So a very impressive place, the most conspicuous consumption I've seen in a long time, beautiful cities, but certainly lots to learn as well. Beijing, I was expecting to be congested and smoky. It was very well run, beautifully manicured and looked after, and dead quiet. Almost 90% of the vehicles on their roads are electric vehicles now. You don't have the fumes, you don't have the noise. It's almost eerie walking in their downtown CBD of Beijing, and it's virtually dead quiet because you don't have vehicle noises. So I think they're like every country, there are lessons we can draw from there and take it. But I think their determined focus on growth, on economic development, is something that we could take a leaf from.
And furthermore, on government, there seems to be a drought that's currently ongoing within the country. I was in the Free State province yesterday. Farms are running low on water reserves. there's a drought, you go to Limpopo, there's a drought as well. What are some of the mechanisms that you as a department are putting in place to resolve this particular issue of drought with the farmers?
Yeah, it is a big issue, and I mean, in hand with the droughts is fire. Once you have dry land, it becomes a lot more vulnerable to fire. And in the Free State, in the Eastern Cape, and in Northwest Province, we've seen massive outbreaks there. Look, the reality is that when you have these disasters, I think that government needs to look at ways, more innovative ways, of having a more nimble response to them. It's not good enough to wait a year to have a state of disaster declared, and that only then releases funding. So one of the issues which I've raised quite clearly when I got into the department is looking at how we find other ways to provide assistance to farmers. One of the models we're busy looking at is trying to create a public-private partnership to make insurance more accessible, particularly to smallholder and family farmers. At the moment, insurance is very expensive at the agricultural level, obviously because of the risk. I believe there's scope with the land bank, with private insurance companies and government to be able to develop a scheme that will be able to trigger release of funds almost immediately through an insurance scheme. I also think it'll save government money in the long term, because you're having to then put a huge budget aside for disaster management, where that could be invested in an insurance scheme, which means that when there is a disaster, you're able to get immediate assistance to the people who need it, and you don't have to wait a year for there to be declared a state of disaster. The other thing we need to look at is how we manage water resources in the country. A simple thing like raising a dam wall by 13 meters can mean that you've got greater access to water for extra thousands of hectares. And so I think that where we have existing infrastructure, we need to look at, are we maximizing that? So on the arid west coast of the Western Cape, for instance, just raising the Clan William Dam by 13 meters will release around about 160 million cubic meters of water for that to then be shared. So you're managing an existing resource. It's far cheaper than building a new dam. And then thirdly, we have to make sure that our irrigation schemes are back up and running. That for me is the low-hanging fruit in the department. There you've got water rights, and it's all lying absolutely unutilized. That's surely where we have to start in terms of re-stimulating agricultural production.
Are you employing unqualified people in your office? I see the EFF has taken you to the ethics committee.
Absolutely not. And I've been very clear about this from the beginning. Nobody employed in my office does not meet the standards and qualifications that are required. And I've had to go through the same process as every other minister in government to be able to do that. And so I've answered the parliamentary question. The answer there in the parliamentary question is the reality, it's the truth, and it's easily verifiable. And so I don't really know what the EFF are banging on about, but and I say they've reported it to the wrong place.
Right, of course. That is Samkele Maseko in conversation there with the Agriculture Minister and the DA's leader, John Steenhuisen, on his reflections on the 100 days in office as the GNU. Of course, so you can get that interview in all of our platforms.